The Agenda is powered by DART, Delaware's transit service, moving forward.
Hi, Wilmington. Good evening. This is Kerwin Gaines, host of The Agenda. We're excited to be back this week. As promised this season, big heavy hitters. And tonight, no difference whatsoever. We want to thank you, first of all, for all your mentions on social media and letting us know how we're doing. We definitely appreciate that. Tonight, we're going to talk about education. And we have the vice president, one of the vice presidents of Neumann University, Ms. Francesca Reed. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And we're going to talk about something that I know is important because I went through it, and that's FAFSA, the big problem that we're having. And I mean, a lot of that falls under your responsibility as one of the vice presidents of enrollment management.
Absolutely. Yeah, I oversee financial aid for Neumann University. So a lot of institutions around the country are dealing with this pain point right now.
Now, what we try to get to here on The Agenda, what we do get to is the bottom line. I've read things in the paper. I've read things in magazines. I kind of know what's going on. FAFSA is very important. Please tell the audience what FAFSA is and what it does and how it affects them.
Absolutely. So FAFSA, which is the Free Application for Federal Student Aid, is essentially the form that families fill out to determine their eligibility for certain kinds of aid. So this form essentially is through the Department of Education, and once a family fills out this form, it goes over to the institutions that they've selected. This particular year, they've undergone some major changes. So back in 2021, there was the FAFSA Simplification Act, which basically, they wanted to simplify the FAFSA process. They wanted to make it easier for students and families to fill it out, and they wanted to open up the doors and make it more accessible, especially for underserved community, first-generation families, et cetera. So it launched later this year than it normally would, which would have been October 1st. Yeah,
I remember, and I'm going to date myself a little bit here, with the FAFSA form, it was almost a booklet, I think that's fair,
Yes.
that you got from your advisor in high school, and there was little bubble forms that you had to fill out, and you had to take your time and do it. And I remember there was whiteout involved. It was a whole thing, but it was important in making it because it determined where you stood financially in regards to assistance. First generation families who just did not have the means to send a child to school, and that was my family. On their own accord, we had to get student aid, right? So this was the determining factor for me and several thousands, millions of other students in the United States before they went to school, because it didn't matter if you were accepted. If you couldn't afford to go, you weren't going.
Right.
And that's still the case today.
It is still the case today. And thank goodness we don't have those bubble forms anymore, and everything is online. And one of the nice things about the new FAFSA was to simplify it, to make it shorter. So instead of 100 questions, it's down to 30. And in some cases, some families could fill it out in 10 minutes. But it hasn't rolled out like it was supposed to.
I don't want to consider this working in IT. I understand that application rollouts can be difficult at times, right? There's going to be a glitch. It's not a matter of if they're going to occur. The matter is how you react to those glitches, resolve those glitches, and ensure functionality moving forward, right? This is no different, but unfortunately, the glitches have been more than few, and they have been detrimental to the whole process.
Absolutely. So it was supposed to launch in December. They did a soft launch basically around the end of the year, and the form was only open online for a couple hours at a time. A lot of families reported that the site would crash on them, and so they would either get kicked out of filing the form, a whole bunch of things. Several weeks later, the form was more accessible, meaning that it was available now 24 hours a day. However, there were still hiccups in families trying to fill it out. We essentially learned later in January that the major calculations to determine things like Pell eligibility, which is basically grant money for need-based aid, was miscalculated. They didn't include inflation adjustments. So that means potentially, millions of people out of Pell eligibility if the calculations weren't correct. So another delay. So instead of getting information in January, we were told late February. Then there was additional issues with the form and other calculations. And so here we are now, late March. We are just now getting information, which are called ICERs. That's essentially the forms, the information, the data that comes over to institutions, so we can start figuring out what families and what type of need-based aid they may be eligible for.
So I don't think that our public, our viewing public, may understand the consistency or the pattern that the universities are expecting every year.
Right.
They know that by such and such a time we need to have this information in, by such and such a time we need to make this decision, because it's affecting the student's graduation and they have enough time to choose that. And that basically is all up in the air now.
It is. It absolutely is. So this time right now, we are still hosting admitted student events, but families would have information from a variety of institutions that they were looking at and compare financial aid offers. That's just not the case. So families essentially, in many cases, are really going blind. Some institutions like Neumann, we've been able to at least tell students what type of merit awards they may be receiving in other scholarships, but the big piece for many families is determining their need eligibility. So whether or not they're going to get full Pell or state grants and other things, that's the information, the key information for many families to see if college is even affordable for them. And that timeline has been completely pushed. So instead of families getting excited and selecting the institutions that their sons and daughters want to go to, in lots of cases, they're still waiting. And they probably will be waiting for a few more weeks until they hear back from institutions. And so that May 1st deadline that many students are accustomed to in declaring where they're going, in that case is being pushed back even further.
I am confident. Believe it or not, I know from someone in the educational system right now, you're like, Kerwin, you're optimistic in that? I am optimistic that this is going to be resolved. My issue is, when is it going to be resolved? And is that timely for this class coming in, which I think is 2027? 28?
Yes.
That's coming in, and how this affects them, right? So I'm optimistic that it's going to be resolved, but I'm not optimistic that it's going to be resolved for 2028. My fear, and I'm sure that Neumann University, as well as every other university in the United States, is going through this, that accepts federal funds and is part of the FAFSA program, there is a fear that this will affect students just walking away. Like we saw during the pandemic,
Absolutely.
Right? They're going to make a decision, I don't want to go to school. Mom and dad, look, this is what I was talking about. This is nonsense. We couldn't afford it anyway. I don't want to get in debt. It's just another excuse why not to further their education. Do you all feel the same way?
Yes. I am terribly concerned that the whole point of this FAFSA simplification was to open doors and opportunities for families,
right,
especially for underserved communities, Black, Latino, first generation. The opposite is happening. Those populations are the ones that are being the most impacted by this delay in the FAFSA. And you're right. There very well could be the possibility that families are just frustrated with the process, or they've heard negative things about filing and could say, you know what, not this year. We're going to take a gap year, or we're going to go out into the workforce. So yes, there is a tremendous fear that they could be a whole generation of students that decide not to go to college because simply A, they may think they can't afford it, or B, the whole frustration of the process.
So what's the ray of hope? I mean, some of the ray of hope is the government understands, the Department of Education understands there's a problem. I am certain, I can't say for sure, but I'm certain that there are people working around the clock to fix this issue. The timeliness is a whole nother subject, and I won't go there and allow for you just to explode here today. But the ray of hope that universities understand this issue, they have put countermeasures in place and a remediation, is that fair to say, for this incoming class?
Yes.
Until the fix.
Until the fix. And so, yes, the Department of Ed has employed additional help to many universities who may be understaffed because it is such a massive change for institutions. So everything that happens kind of on the back end to make award letters happen all had to be redone. And essentially, we were waiting on the Department of Ed to make sure that we had the accurate calculations in order to do this. And so when we finally got that information, now we're working on the back end to try to see if it works and if it makes sense. And in some cases it's working, and in some cases the information that we've received is not accurate. So then has to go back to the Department of Ed and to the families to fix it.
And it's not accurate, just to be clear,
Sure.
because of deficiencies within the database, or is it not accurate because of user error?
Call it a combination of both.
Okay.
So in some cases, it's a calculation error that has nothing to do with the family. In other cases, it could be because a parent didn't sign it electronically. And so it will still be submitted, but then it appears to us as an error. So we can't do anything with it. So then it has to go back essentially to the family to go back into the FAFSA and fix it. Oh, but by the way, they can't go back into a FAFSA right now when it is submitted because it's kind of on lockdown while the Department of Ed is working to get everything corrected. So the latest that we've heard is potentially middle of April, where families can then go back into the form, make edits, adjustments, and in some cases even add an institution to the FAFSA.
But then they only have, 2 more weeks of school?
Well, yeah, the deadline is right around the corner. I will say that a lot of institutions have pushed that deadline.
Okay, that's part of the remediation.
Absolutely, yes. So while May 1st is kind of the preferred deadline, I think, for a lot of institutions, we simply know that you can't force a family to make a decision, especially when they don't have all the information. And so, yes, a lot of institutions, including Neumann, have kind of pushed that deadline back to June 1st. We've been providing information, all kinds of information to make sure that we're educating families, making sure that they file the FAFSA and everything that they need to do. So we're ready to go and can award them in a timely fashion.
We mentioned a little bit off air, and I want to bring it on air for conversational purposes here, that there is a form or a way, I will say, that universities such as Neumann can give a guesstimate in regards to the award that a family or student can receive.
Absolutely. So we call it an estimated award, and every institution can do something a little bit different. What we have done is we'll take a look at the student's academic record. We'll provide them a merit award up front. They may get a first generation grant, some other types of grants they may be eligible for that we don't need FAFSA information. So at least gives them an idea of the other types of opportunities that are available. The piece that we're missing is really kind of the family finance piece. Now, some institutions have taken, it's called an SAI, the Student Aid Index. It used to be called an EFC, which is essentially an estimate on what a family can afford for college. So once you've filed all that information, it kind of, for lack of a better word, spits out a number and says, this family can afford around X amount to pay for college. So some institutions are taking that kind of estimated SAI and making some determinations on whether or not they may get need-based aid or they may not. So it's been kind of all over the place, essentially, what institutions are doing, but they're doing it because they're trying to give families an idea of what their out-of-pocket costs will be.
Yeah, and I don't want to go down a rabbit hole about how accurate those indexes are.
That's right.
But would you still say to the families, hey, look, don't put too much stock into this, or put a lot of stock into these guesstimates, but still apply nonetheless?
It's a base. I mean, at least it gives you an idea of whether it's in the ballpark or not. Every institution operates differently, whether it's state or private institution, but I think there's something to say, and at least if it's within kind of a ballpark of what you were thinking, keep at it And what I would say is don't give up hope. Don't count out an institution because you may think it's not within reach, because it very well can change in the next couple of weeks.
And it will change, right?
Absolutely,
so
will change. Yeah.
It won't. We're not saying that it's going to happen, or we're wishing it. This will happen.
Yes.
I understand, and firsthand, I know how stressful it is for students that are making that decision. I mean, it's bad enough, right?
It
You
is.
don't need any added stress in regards to making a decision when it comes to college, right? You don't need any added stress when it comes to making a decision in regards to how to pay for college, right? This is generational, and it can put you on a good road, or not necessarily a bad road, but it puts your career, your life, your family in a completely different trajectory by making these decisions, right? So one of the things that I've heard, and your ear is to the ground more than mine is in regards to FAFSA information, right? But I heard that there was an inbox where students have been sending requests, or prospective students and families have been sending requests and questions and comments in regards to this database, and this isn't working, that isn't working, and they went unheard.
Yes, it was actually the New York Times reported out about a couple of weeks ago that they discovered that there was about 70,000 emails that were untouched. So this was anything from somebody having a question, or they were asked to submit documentation to support the FAFSA. We learned that the Department of Ed has recently discovered that those emails had not been answered. So they're, of course, working around the clock to make sure those are all addressed. But again, it just is another thing that adds to the delay in this whole process, unfortunately.
And I want to go back to this because we're in the tri-state area. There's a lot of families here that are struggling now with inflation, with just overall life. They're trying to make ends meet. There is a large amount of students that are first-generation students that are really teetering on whether or not to make this decision in regards to higher education or not. And when you're first generation, they may not have the benefit of having parents that are well-versed in the collegiate selection process and all of the hurdles and understanding this. So on top of their added pressure of allowing their young one to go to college, their loved one to go to college, they're faced with this big issue. I want to give an assurance to them, and from you, from representing the university, for them to continue this process. We understand that it's difficult, but why should they not give up?
They shouldn't give up, because in the end, they will be rewarded. And when I say rewarded, that they will have the opportunity to go to a university and pursue their education. It is frustrating now. We understand there's a number of barriers, but there's also a number of resources, whether it's someone at Neumann University, admissions or financial aid office, or others at other universities. People are sitting down with families to help them file it online.
Okay.
So don't give up hope, no matter how frustrated families may feel, or they don't even understand what's happening.
I say it's more fear for a lot of them. It's probably fear.
It is probably fear. The whole process of applying to college in general is scary. And so add this onto it is just another layer.
Right.
And I think a lot of, depending where you are in the country or even the tri-state area, there's high schools that are well sourced and there's high schools that are not well sourced. And you've got, in some cases, school counselors that have hundreds and hundreds of students that they're working with at a time. And they're, kind of in the same situation that we are. They have the information we have. And so they're trying to work with families and so forth. So yes, it could be a very frustrating time, but there are resources out there. And the end game is that every student should have the opportunity to pursue education. And in the end, hopefully this time next year, we will not be having this conversation, and the FAFSA will be working the way it should be, and families will have more opportunities in need-based aid and all those things that this process was supposed to have done.
And I know that you've watched our show, you understand the basis of our show here, and a lot of that is bringing legislation to light and bringing account to legislators, right? So for this, I can't understand why it has gotten this far, right, without a resolution. We're talking about billions of dollars. We're talking about lives. We're talking about trajectory in a time when our country has a workforce that's depleting, needs to re-up the coffers, right? Understand that, hey, we got to get these people to work. We got to get them educated. We got to get them back out there in the field. And right now, it seems as though we're tying our hands behind our back, right? What would you ask? I know what I'm going to ask of my legislators, right? But from a university perspective, it seems as though the Department of Ed dropped the ball on this. Is that fair to say?
I think that's a fair assessment. There have been a number of, I would say, kind of different excuses. And like you said earlier, we understand this was a heavy lift. It was already delayed a year. This should have already been done over a year ago. But there was delays. There was resource issues. There were other things going on. We all understand that. I think the issue is it just appears to be one thing after another. And I think that, the biggest thing that we mentioned just a minute ago about the inbox of unanswered emails.
70,000.
70,000.
Unanswered.
I don't know. I can't imagine if I'd never responded to 70,000 emails.
I'm paranoid over 10.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, I think the Department of Ed needs to give institutions some grace. I mean, we have to follow very high standards ourselves and report out, every year, making sure that we're following guidelines and so forth. I think, they need to give institutions some grace, and they also, I think, need to provide families with whatever additional resources they need, and making sure that they have access to file the FAFSA, to get their questions answered, because there's some things that are just completely out of an institution's hand.
Right, and this is when legislators now, during this time of election, where they're standing on their stumps and saying this is, what they promised to do. It is lack of action like this that makes us very nervous, right? That lack of action that's directly affecting households when they're having those kitchen counter or kitchen table conversations, which we hear so much during election times. These are the kitchen table conversations.
Right.
This is, how the heck are we going to send this kid to school, or these kids to school, right? Several families have multiples, including myself.
Right.
They're all going to college at the same time. How do we make those decisions? And let me tell you something. We want as much assistance as we possibly can, and when we're making that decision, and we're expecting our politicians, our decision makers, to be aggressive in regards to this, proactive, and not only proactive in regards to their constituents, but to the universities as well, because you have an obligation as a university to give the most updated information you possibly can back to the families, back to the students, prospective students, to help them make the decision. What concerns me the most, Francesca, is that June is going to get here before we know it, and we are going to have a traffic jam. And I understand that Neumann is doing their best and making the remediations necessary, but not all schools are going to do this. So let's look at all the schools in general. And some kids are going to be just lost in the shuffle. They're not going to be able to make that decision, and they're going to fall off the road to continued education, such as they did during COVID, and we're going to lose that 2028 class of prospective students to bureaucracy and paperwork. Am I wrong? If I'm wrong, tell me I'm wrong.
No, I mean, it's certainly, that's a fear that we all share. I mean, we already know that there's 30% for the class graduating this year, high school seniors, there's 30% less of them that have filed the FAFSA than in previous years.
One more time, 30%
30% less. So we already know that there are students out there who may have given up, or they've heard, because it's such a debacle, that they're waiting. So we already know that there are families out there and students who may not, or may take a break, and that is terrifying.
Take a break.
Yeah.
I don't think as a country we can afford to have newer generations take these breaks in regards to career. I'm not saying that every career, and I'm going to go down this rabbit hole a little bit. I'm not saying that every career requires a college education. We made that very clear. But they do require training. And there are several other training classes that everything from CDL to welding or whatever that accept federal funding.
Yes.
Where this form is still absolutely necessary. So for those at home, this is just not a college issue. This is an issue for all the training programs that are accepting federal funds for your student that plan to move on and do. If they want to go to a great welding program, they want to go to anything else, right? It affects them. So we urge our Delaware delegation and delegations all throughout the country to help us resolve this issue.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, you have a heavy lift yourself, and so does the university. If there's anything that we can do here at DETV to get that information out to the public, because when it comes down to it, Neumann, although in Pennsylvania, is our local school. Right? It's 20 minutes up the road.
Yes, we are.
How many students did you say we mentioned?
So we have a little over 2,100 students, undergraduate and graduate students, serving Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and states international students. But I mean, this is our primary market, and half of our student body is either first generation and or come from Pell eligible families. Right. So this is impacting. This really hurts.
This is right
there. This is right there. Yeah. So, but there's resources available on studentaid.gov. That's essentially where you would go to file the FAFSA and get additional information. And then, of course, anyone can go to our website at neumann.edu.
Okay. And is there any information other than that website that you'd like to pass on to folks? Any folks that they need to call or reach out to, or website direction?
So our Office of Financial Aid is ready to assist, and we can answer any general questions you may have, or in particular to your application at Neumann.
Thank you very much, Ms. Reed. I appreciate you coming on the show this week.
I appreciate you having me.
And we look forward to having this issue resolved, but if there's anything else we can do, please let us know.
Thank you so much.
As always, thank you for tuning into the agenda this week. We look forward to seeing you next week right here on the agenda.